Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage your host and Constellation Research CEO, Ray Wang.
Hi, everybody. How you doing? Good evening. Thank you for coming to the Supernova Awards dinner. We've got some awesome finalists. They are here in the front row. But before we do that, round of applause to everybody. Thank you. I'm so honored here to be with my good friend, John Hagel. As you guys know, for over 35 years, John has graced the boardrooms and executive hallways talking about business strategy and information technology. He's coined terms such as infomerciaries. He's been a visionary in seeking where the internet would be, what these commerce models would look like, what the networks would look like, and more importantly, what that future is. In this time of massive disruption, and this time where corporate boards are trying to understand what is next, people are a little bit fearful of that change. John's got something for us to say, and I think we've got the time to listen into what you have. Thank you so much for being here, John. You're a three-time keynoter here, and I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
It's all yours.
Appreciate it. Thank you. We are in the early stages of what I call the big shift, which is transforming the global economy. We've been studying this. I run a research center called the Center for the Edge, and we've been studying the big shift in many different dimensions for the past decade. And one of the things that I love about the big shift is that it is full of paradox. And one of the paradoxes is that the big shift, if you understand how it's transforming the economy, on the one side is creating exponentially expanding opportunity. We can create far more value with far less resource, far more quickly than would have ever been imaginable 20, 30 years ago. Exponentially expanding opportunity. At the same time, it's creating mounting performance pressure on all of us as individuals and as institutions. Opportunity and pressure, all at the same time. Another paradox is the big shift is generating an avalanche of data, more data than we would have ever believed possible. At the same time, our performance, our company performance, corporate performance, is declining. Now that may come as a bit of a surprise. It's a bold statement. We actually looked, we asked the question, how have companies done with all this amazing digital technology? How has performance improved? We found to our surprise no one had even asked the question, much less answered it. Because we wanted to look at it over decades, not just the past year or a couple of years. We wanted to go back to 1965, a few years before digital technology really came into the business world, until today. And we ended up looking at all public companies in the US, not a sample, but every single public company from 1965 until today. And we took as our measure of performance, it's not great, not perfect, but we think good enough, measure of performance, return on assets. So what's happened to return on assets for all public companies in the US from 1965 until today? It's gone down by 75% over that time period. Decades. It's been a long, sustained erosion. There are waves that correspond to the short-term economic cycles, but the long-term trend absolutely clear. And a bit surprising. I mean, I think just a few days ago we passed record highs for all the stock indices in the US. What's happening? Well, that's a whole other presentation, but I'll say, think about adding debt to the balance sheet. Think about stock buybacks. Think about higher dividend rates. Our companies are doing everything they can to cushion the investors from the fundamentals of the business performance. But return on assets, collapsing. Deteriorating performance despite all this extraordinary data that's now available to us. And that's not the only thing that's declining. The other thing, which I think everybody recognizes, you hear it quoted all the time, is that trust in all of our institutions is declining around the world. It's not just companies, it's governments, it's media, it's schools. Trust in all of our institutions declining. What's happening? Why is this happening? Our belief, based on the work that we've done, is that there's an increasing disconnect between the way the world is changing and the institutions that we have. And fundamentally, I'm going to oversimplify because I've got limited time here, but basically our belief is the institutions around the world are run around a specific model that we call scalable efficiency. The key to success for every institution is to become more and more efficient at scale. That's the key, scalable efficiency. And how have we done that? Well, we've tightly specified every task that needs to be done. We've highly standardized every task, so it's done in the same efficient way throughout the institution. We've tightly integrated all the activities, so we removed all those inefficient buffers. Scalable efficiency at its best. What's one of the biggest movements in the business world over the past several decades? Business process re-engineering. Let's become more efficient. Let's tightly integrate all those activities, end-to-end processes. And now we have a whole set of other programs. Virtually every company that I know has a digital transformation program. When I look under the covers and go into the details, basically those digital transformation programs are about taking digital technology and applying it so we do everything we do faster and cheaper. But it's the same things, just faster and cheaper. Scalable efficiency at its best. Now we all can talk about semantics and definitions. You know, everybody's got a different view of what transformation is. At least in my view, transformation, the metaphor I like to use, is the caterpillar to the butterfly. If the result is not unrecognizable relative to what you began with, to me, that's not transformation. And just making the caterpillar walk faster? Sorry. Not to say that's not useful, but it's not transformation. And then, what are we doing with all this data? And again, I'm going to oversimplify, but I think generally true. The two broad uses we're making of all this data that's accumulating, one is we take the data to do things faster and cheaper, more efficiently. And we take the data to more efficiently target customers, to increase the conversion rates, efficiency at its best. That's what we're doing with the data. Now, the scalable efficiency model created huge success for institutions around the world for over a century. But I think the question is the world changing in ways that challenge that model? And we believe it is. The world is changing on many different levels. One broad trend is customers are becoming more and more powerful. all of us around this room are guilty as customers. We're demanding more. Brand loyalty has gone down at dramatic rates. We're more willing to shift from one vendor to another if our needs are not being met. And we're also becoming more demanding. You know, again, I'm going to generalize, but in the past century, our economy has been driven by what I call the industrial bargain. And the industrial bargain basically says, look, if you want an affordable product or service, we can deliver it to you. But it's going to be a standardized mass market product or service. That's the only way we can make it affordable to you. That was the industrial bargain. Guess what? As customers, we are less and less willing to accept that bargain anymore. We want a product or service that is tailored to our individual specific needs and that will evolve with our needs as rapidly as our needs evolve. We're becoming more and more demanding in terms of what we want. And so I think in that situation, we all talk about Industry 2.0, Industry 3.0, Industry 4.0. I believe we are out of the industrial era, period. It's not 3 or 4 or 5, it's gone. We are going into what I call the contextual era, where what really matters is context, the context of every individual at any point in time. And if we don't understand that context and act on that context, we're going to be increasingly marginalized. A fundamentally different world, and one where that scalable efficiency model is less and less efficient. There's another force that's driving the challenge on scalable efficiency, which is the increasing pace of change and increasing uncertainty. If you go back to the notion of tightly specified tasks, what happens when something unexpected occurs that you hadn't specified an activity for? We did a study that showed that in a variety of different functions within large companies, roughly 60 to 70% of headcount time is being spent on what we call exception handling. It's addressing an exception that came up unexpectedly. Nobody expected it. It wasn't part of the manual. People scramble to figure out what to do to handle that exception. And they're doing it extremely inefficiently because the whole focus is on the standardized processes. And so in that kind of world, the scalable efficiency model that again drove huge success for a century is increasingly challenged, and we believe helps to explain why that return on assets is declining at such a significant and sustained rate. And by the way, there is no evidence of that decline leveling off, much less turning around. So our belief is that is a wake-up call to say the approach that we've relied on in our institutions is no longer going to be helpful. So what are companies doing in response to this? I think everybody that I talk to has a sense that pressure is mounting. And again, both at an individual level and at institutional level. But one of the things that I'm concerned about and that I challenge with a lot of executives I deal with is they're tending to look at technology as a panacea. The answer is artificial intelligence. The answer is cloud computing, Internet of Things, blockchain. That'll solve our problems. I like to remind executives that actually artificial intelligence, as an example, is extremely stupid without data. There's so little focus on the data. It's all about the technology. Let's just get some AI in here, blockchain, whatever. The assumption is the data is going to be there. Not a problem. We have the data. I want to challenge that assumption. Because again, if you look at the statistics around declining trust in all of our institutions, I believe it's going to be more and more challenging to get access to the data that we really need to create value. And so the challenge is, how do we rebuild trust so that we can get privileged access to the data that in fact will drive a lot of these technologies and help us to create those exponentially expanding opportunities. But that's not generally on the agenda of most of the executives that I deal with. The question of how do we shift away from this declining trust and rebuild trust. And I think there are many things that are going to be required to rebuild trust. And I'm going to focus on just a couple of opportunities, or I believe imperatives. One is a notion of reframing business models. And then I'm going to go to a more fundamental level of reframing our institutional model. Because I think those are going to be critical to rebuilding trust. So when we talk about business models, I think there's going to be a significant evolution in business models, and it's going to vary depending on what industry we're in, what kind of company we are. But I see the evolution along three different dimensions of a business model. The first dimension is payment. What are you paying for? In the traditional business model, you pay up front for a product or service. Give me the cash, you get the product or service, and it's up to you to what you do with it. Increasingly, again, I think as a reflection of growing customer power, customers are saying, no, I only want to pay for what I use. If I don't use it, I'm not going to pay for it. So usage-based models become more and more central. And I would say over time, we're going to see a further evolution, which is towards payment based on impact. I don't want to pay just if I'm using the product or service. I only want to pay if I'm getting the impact, the value that I was promised with the product or service. That's a very different model and becoming increasingly viable given our ability to capture data and read context in ways that were not possible in the past. So a shift in the payment model from payment up front, ultimately to payment upon impact. There's another dimension of business model evolution, which has to do with data. You know, actually, very little of the data that we capture actually gets returned to the customer in terms of any value. Increasingly, our view is business models are increasingly going to be driven by data that's paid back to the customer in terms of value. So part of the early stage is just helping the customer to see more of their context at any point in time, giving them more insight into what's going on around them. Data for descriptive data. Over time, we see as early signals of the use of data, predictive data, that will help customers to anticipate things that are going to happen to them. And then ultimately, a third level of data, which is prescriptive data, that not only helps you anticipate what's going to happen, but gives advice in terms of here are the 2 or 3 things you should be doing if and when this happens to you. In this context, just as one example, I see the insurance industry going through a profound shift. Today, what's insurance? You're paying, it's risk compensation. If something bad happens to you as an insurance company, we'll pay you. Okay, great. Increasingly, my belief is insurance companies are going to be focused not on just risk compensation, but risk minimization. Why not help customers to minimize the risk? And take it one step further, and again, I believe this is all becoming more feasible given the amount of data that is capturable, is we're going to compensate based on reward maximization. Customers take risk not because they want to take risk, it's because they're trying to achieve something that's of value to them. How can insurance companies help customers achieve more of that value, more rewards? And yes, we'll compensate you when risk occurs, but we're going to help you minimize the risk as you go after those rewards. Fundamentally different mindset and way of thinking about value to the customer. So that's a second dimension, is business models that are data-driven, going from descriptive to predictive to prescriptive. And then there's a third level of business model evolution, which is around connectivity. Today, most businesses, it's a one-to-one relationship. I got a product or service, I'm going to sell you, you pay me, and we have a one-to-one relationship. Increasingly, business models, we believe, are going to be driven by the ability to connect customers to a broader range of participants, initially on a specific platform. But then over time, as technology evolves, as the infrastructures evolve, the ability to connect customers with any third party anywhere in the world, regardless of what platform they're on. That's of huge value to customers. And over time, our belief is that will become more and more central as a business model. So 3 different dimensions of evolution. Not every company is going to evolve along all 3 dimensions, but looking ahead, that's what we see in terms of helping. And by the way, the more we evolve on those 3 dimensions, the more we can rebuild trust with customers. If customers are only paying based on impact achieved, I'm more willing to trust you than if you're asking for payment up front, regardless of whether you get any value from the product or service. If I'm getting data from you that helps me not just to anticipate things, but to actually act on things that help me to be more successful, I'm going to trust you more. And at the extreme, I think the opportunity that's being created, if you look at that business model evolution I just described on the 3 dimensions, if you move along all 3 dimensions, there's a new business opportunity we believe that's emerging that is very significant. It's what we call the trusted advisor. That increasingly, in a world of mounting pressure and more choice as customers, we're going to value having someone that we trust who is going to advise us and help us to become more and more successful in whatever we're trying to accomplish. Trusted advisor, significant unmet need and growing unmet need in the marketplace. And the trusted advisor has many different aspects to it, but one thing I think that makes it particularly interesting is the trusted advisor is driven by what we call economies of scope. The more I know about you as a customer, the more helpful I can be to you in terms of anticipating and addressing your needs. If I'm just seeing a small slice of who you are, yeah, I can be helpful on the margin, but I'll never be able to compete with an advisor who sees you holistically. And the more other customers I'm serving, the more helpful I can be to you as an individual customer. Because now I can start to see patterns and see that customers like you are getting enormous value from this kind of product or service. You've never asked for it. Maybe you should. Trusted advisors are challenging to the customer. They're not just waiting for the order to come in. They're being proactive and challenging and saying, by the way, you're asking for the wrong product or service. Here's what you should be asking for, given who you are and what your context is. So economies of scope, we believe over time these trusted advisors will become very large mega corporations, global corporations. They're going to start in specific niches. And one area, we look for early signals for a lot of these changes. One of the early signals we see for the trusted advisor is what are called wellness advisors. People who are emerging to help us become more well, not just waiting for us to get sick, but actually helping us to improve our physical condition and getting very detailed, deep data about us as individuals, real-time physical data monitoring your physical condition, and then helping to connect the customers with a broad range of wellness providers depending on what your physical challenges might be. But that's kind of an early indicator of a space where these trusted advisors are starting to emerge. Over time, we believe they'll come into those segments, but over time will address a broader and broader range of needs for the customers. So a big opportunity in terms of building this trusted advisor business model that can be helpful to us as we face an increasingly rapidly changing and uncertain world. I will say that, and I'm going to be a bit provocative on this front, I think two of the business models that are most vulnerable and most challenged in this big shift world we're going into, advertising-based models and commission-based models. Because in those models, somebody else is paying the bill. And as the expression goes, if you're not paying, you are the product. And increasingly, that is driving a lack of trust. I know you're being paid by somebody else. That's whose interests you're serving, not my interests. My belief is that increasingly, as we try to rebuild trust, it's going to be about the customer paying directly, rather than an advertiser or rather than commission-based payments from vendors. So, very different kind of business model in terms of who pays and what they're paying for. Those are business models. I want to go to the more fundamental level of institutional models. And here I go back to the notion of in the past, of the past century, our institutional model has basically been a scalable efficiency model. The key goal of every institution is to become more efficient at scale. My belief is that in this big shift world, there's a need for a very different institutional model. And it's what I've come to call scalable learning, rather than scalable efficiency. That the reason we will come together in large institutions is because of the opportunity to learn faster than we ever could on our own as individually or as part of a smaller organization. In a world that's rapidly changing, the ability to learn faster becomes more and more essential. And I should emphasize here, when I talk about learning, most executives go to training programs. Oh yeah, we have training programs. They learn all they want in the training room and then they go back to work and do their job. The learning I'm talking about is not learning in the form of training programs where you're sharing existing knowledge. Because here's the challenge. In a world that's exponentially changing, existing knowledge becomes obsolete at an accelerating rate. The most powerful form of learning, the most valuable form of learning in this big shift world is learning in the form of creating new knowledge, knowledge that was not known before, and creating new knowledge through action in the work environment by confronting unexpected situations and opportunities. and figuring out how to create value in those situations. That's a very different form of learning, but again, increasingly important in a world of rapid change. And it goes back to this notion of, if we're moving into what I call the contextual age, learning about context, which is very unique and individual and rapidly evolving, requires this form of scalable learning. So, very different form of learning. I will say, too, that when I talk to executives about scalable learning, they say to me, oh, well, that's really interesting. We'll do scalable efficiency and scalable learning. I want to suggest that actually these two institutional models are in fundamental conflict with each other. They cannot coexist. And I'll just give you, at a high level, the example of what's the one message that every employee hears in a scalable efficiency environment, a scalable efficiency institution. Failure is not an option. You will produce as predicted, as expected, efficiently and reliably. Okay, got that message. What's the one thing that learning requires? Failure. If you're not failing, you're not learning fast enough. Reconcile those two messages. A choice is going to need to be made. Is it scalable efficiency or scalable learning? Now, I will say that I have, as part of our research, we've been looking for scalable learning institutions, and certainly we have not found any at scale who are truly pursuing scalable learning throughout the institution. But we have found interesting kinds of slices of scalable learning going on. And I'll just give you two examples to illustrate. One is a company called LiveOps that actually does customer call center operations on an outsourced basis for larger companies. Interesting thing about LiveOps, they actually have no call centers. They have 20,000 workers, and they all work from their homes. And they've created a very effective technology platform to route the right call to the right home at the right time. But in the context of scalable learning, interesting thing, the two the founders of LiveOps took inspiration from an online video game. It was called World of Warcraft. Some of you may know it. I won't ask who. But in World of Warcraft, every player is given a real-time performance dashboard, where in real time they're given feedback on their performance on multiple dimensions in the game. Extraordinarily powerful device to help the players learn faster, because in real time they're seeing how they're doing on multiple dimensions. The founders of LiveOps said, wow, that's really interesting. Why don't we give every one of our employees a real-time performance dashboard? Now, I would wager that if most traditional companies did that, they would use those performance dashboards as an instrument of punishment, right? You're falling behind on these 3 dimensions of performance. You have 6 months to get your act together, you're out of here. LiveOps did something totally different. They invited the workers who were having performance issues to ask for help. And they created an online discussion forum where a worker could go in and say, you know, I'm having trouble handling this kind of customer call in this performance dimension. Does anybody have any ideas or suggestions for how I can improve my performance? And most importantly, the company started to watch, recognize, and reward the workers who were emerging as coaches and helpers of the other workers, creating a very powerful peer-to-peer learning environment where they could learn faster together. Just one small example of one dimension in which, if you took scalable learning seriously, how you might approach it. But there's another dimension of scalable learning, and here I take inspiration from a Silicon Valley entrepreneur who once made the observation. He said, look, no matter how many smart people you have within your organization, just remember one thing. There are a lot more smart people outside your organization than inside. So if you're really serious about scalable learning, and you just focus on the people within the four walls of your enterprise, you're never going to scale learning to the extent of companies that systematically reach out and connect with expertise beyond their company. And in this context, based on the research we've done, we believe the companies that are most sophisticated in this form of scalable learning are not in the West. They're actually in China and India. And I'll just give you one quick example of a Chinese company. It was called Li & Fung. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's not very well known in the West, but their customers are apparel designers. All the brand names that we know and love, Calvin Klein, Ann Taylor. They basically work with those apparel designers and take care of everything from sourcing of raw material through all the stages of production, all the logistics, delivering anywhere in the world that's required, whatever retail distribution centers. Interesting thing about Li & Fung, they do none of that activity themselves. They operate through a global network of 15,000 business partners. And they've become extremely sophisticated at orchestrating what kind of expertise is required at what point in time in what part of the supply network to serve these apparel designers. But the interesting thing in this context, we went out as part of our research and interviewed many of the partners in their network. And we asked them, why are you part of the Li & Fung network? The answer we got back, top of mind, without prompting, because we learn faster as part of the Li & Fung network than we ever could on our own or as part of anyone else's network. You know, I've interviewed many partners of Western companies, and I have never once heard that answer. Because we learn faster? No, we get squeezed harder. And at the same time that Western companies are reducing the number of participants in their supply networks, why? Scalable efficiency. It's more efficient with fewer partners. Li & Fung, with 15,000 business partners, every day is adding new partners. Because their belief is the more diverse expertise they have in their network, the faster everyone's going to learn. Fundamentally different mindset and approach to scalable learning. Learning beyond the enterprise through networks, connecting, and building deep trust-based relationships that support that learning. Very different kind of model. So, institutional model shift from scalable efficiency to scalable learning. If you internalize the implications of scalable learning, it changes everything we do in our institutions. How we organize, how we operate, how we manage day to day, everything has to change. That leads to transformation. And I'll just quickly give you my perspective on the challenge of transformation, which I believe all our institutions are going to have to go through in order to thrive in this big shift world. But the question is, how do you drive transformation? The traditional approach is what I call the top-down Big Bang approach. A senior leader gets conviction, that we need to change everything. And they get up in front of their leadership team and they say, everything has to change. But because we're a large organization, this is going to take a lot of money. Can't do this on a shoestring. And because we're a large organization, this is going to take a long time. Can't turn around a battleship overnight. But trust me, at the end of this, wonderful things are going to happen. In my experience, what that senior executive has just done is put a red bullseye on their back and invited the immune system and the antibodies that exist in every large institution to mobilize and crush. A lot of money? Not from my pockets. I don't have any money to spare. A long time? I got quarterly performance targets I have to meet. Don't distract me with this long-term stuff. And mobilize to crush. And if there's one lesson I have from the transformation efforts I've been involved with, it's never, ever underestimate the power of the immune system and the antibodies that exist in every large institution. So the question is, if that top-down Big Bang approach doesn't work, are there other options? And I believe there are. There's an approach that I think, again, the paradox is the same forces that are creating mounting pressure are also creating an opportunity to drive a very different approach to transformation. And it's what I call scaling the edge. Rather than going in and trying to transform the core, find an edge that today is relatively marginal in terms of revenue and profits. But if you understand the exponential forces that are reshaping the markets and industries you're in, that edge has the potential to scale to the point where it becomes the new core of the business. Not just a diversification effort, not just a growth initiative, it will be the new core of the company. And focus on scaling the edge and driving the transformation in the edge. And resist any temptation to take that edge and move it back into the core. To use it as a catalyst to drive change in the core. Because again, in my experience, the immune system is very effective at identifying that foreign body as it comes in and mobilizing to crush it. So, scaling the edge, we believe, is the way to drive transformation for large institutions and move from that scalable efficiency model to the scalable learning model. And ultimately, that is the path to really move us from mounting performance pressure and deteriorating performance to exponentially expanding opportunity. And I think that's very exciting. But I don't view it as an opportunity. I view it as an imperative. If we don't do that, we are going to be marginalized. And so it's up to all of us to make that journey and move into that scalable learning world. Thank you very much.
You're going to do some questions?
If there
All
are
right,
questions.
we got Sachin and I are going to share with you some mics. If you got questions, raise them. I'll bring out a mic. Some did. Here we go.
Forgive me because I'm part of Ray's team, but I still have to ask you this question. You're talking about return on tangible assets, right?
Assets on the balance sheet.
Okay, so that's
So not just
basically
physical
tangible
assets.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah, no, for sure.
I'll grill you later over drinks.
I'm sorry?
I said I'll grill you later over drinks.
Okay. No, that's good.
Hey, John, Mike Freda. How should startups be building now for scalable learning instead of scalable efficiency? What should we be doing early on?
I think certainly startups have a much better opportunity because it's more of a green field and you don't have that established way of doing things. I would say that, again, I've been in Silicon Valley now for 40 years. And one of the biggest tragedies I see as these successful startups begin to scale, they begin to want to bring in adult supervision. Senior executives from large traditional institutions who will help them embrace the scalable efficiency model. Standardized processes, tightly specified throughout the organization. Resist that temptation. Keep the adults out. And I'll also say that one of the ways I have of describing the shift from scalable efficiency to scalable learning is the mark of a strong leader. In the scalable efficiency model, what's the mark of a strong leader? It's someone who has an answer to all the questions. No matter what question you have, the leader can provide the answer. And by the way, if the leader doesn't have an answer, maybe it's time to get rid of them and find somebody who does. That's the mark of a strong leader. In a scalable learning institution, the mark of a strong leader is the one who has the most powerful questions. And who will freely admit they don't have an answer. And number two, ask for help. Can you help? If we could come up with an answer to the question, we could accomplish amazing things. It builds trust. One of the reasons I believe for declining trust that I mentioned is these leaders who say they have the answers to all the questions. There are two possibilities. One is they have no clue what's happening in the world, or they're lying. In either case, I don't trust them. One way to rebuild trust is to say, I don't know. I need help. Can you help? It's a fundamental cultural shift, but I think absolutely essential to drive scalable learning in our institutions.
Hi, John. This is Richie. I'm asking a question for Vala. So obviously, most of us here agree with your hypothesis. What are your thoughts on what is needed in education, given that that is sort of the supply chain of the human capital that we're talking about that's needed?
Oh, God. Don't get me started. So I'll preface it with the observation that in third grade, I made an amazing discovery. And that was I learned how to forge my mother's signature. And I started to write notes to my teacher asking for Johnny to be excused from class because he has a doctor's appointment. I became known as the sickliest child in third grade. I was always at the doctor's. I hated school. And I will say that, again, I've done a lot of research on the evolution of our education system. And our education system was very explicitly designed to take children who are very creative and curious and teach them how to follow orders and memorize and play back as expected to the teacher what they learned. Why? So that they could go into the factories and follow orders as expected, efficiently and reliably. We have an educational system that was tailor-made for the scalable efficiency world. And I believe we have to start from the ground up and rethink our entire educational system. Now, I will say too, I often get the objection when I talk about scalable learning and the kind of work environment, and work that needs to be done in a scalable learning institution. One of the key pushbacks I get is, oh, come on, John, some of us are capable of being creative and imaginative, but most of us just want to be told what to do and get a solid paycheck. And I say, okay, let's go to a playground and let's look at children 6 or 7 years old. Show me one who doesn't have creativity, curiosity, imagination. We all had it as children. What happened? We went to school. So again, I think our educational system needs to be completely reconstructed from the ground up if we're going to survive in this exponential world. Question over there?
I'm asking this question for Richie. So obviously, this room believes in the power of that network brain. As members of the Constellation Executive Network, we believe in that and reach out. But how do you scale that to the thousands of organizations out there, to where they think about the people outside their organization to bring it in?
That's a whole other presentation. we could, by the way, yeah, exactly. By the way, all the research we do at the Center for the Edge is freely available. It's you just go online and you can look up on these various topics, and there's all kinds of research reports. And I think the one research report, Zoom Out, Zoom In, was at your tables. But I think in that context, it's a process of staging, if you will, and in my experience, it starts again with this notion of asking questions and having a sense of what motivates the third parties to participate. This is a whole other topic. It's the focus of my new book that I'm just finished writing. I say that throughout my career, I was brought up as a business strategist. Started my career at BCG, spent 16 years at McKinsey and Company. I came to believe strategy was everything. Get the right strategy and that's it. Over time, I've come to believe that it's actually less about strategy and more about psychology. And that if we don't understand the emotions that are driving each of us, starting with ourselves, we're never going to achieve what we want to achieve. And in the context of starting to build out these networks and ecosystems to connect others, in my belief, another brief story, I was describing to Dee Hock, who was the founder of Visa, my theory about ecosystems and what's required for ecosystems. And I was talking about risk and reward, that we need to focus on quantifying the rewards and minimizing the risk, and that was the key to getting participation and scaling. And he stopped me in mid-sentence and he said, "John, you got it all wrong. You're talking like a business person." He said, "It's about fear and hope. What you got to do is find ways to build hope and excitement and reduce the fear. And if you don't think about it in emotional terms, you're not going to accomplish it just with numbers about risk and reward. That ain't the answer. It's about fear and hope." And so I think at the end of the day, it's understanding the emotions that are motivating all the participants you're trying to bring in and reinforcing that over time to be hope and excitement about the opportunity.
Thank you so much. I'm asking this on behalf of Richie as well. Richie's got a lot of questions, so I'm just going to lay that out there. I can go all night. You spent 40 years in Silicon Valley, you said. Where else would you live? I mean, if you could pick somewhere else other than the Valley.
Are you kidding? Is there
Listen,
anywhere else?
I lived in Atlanta and New York, so for me, We got some pretty good things going on the other side of the country as well. Where else would you live? If you had to move, where would you go?
There are only two places I would consider moving to.
Okay.
The island of Capri and Bali.
Any other questions on behalf of Richie? All right, a big round of applause, John Hagel.
Thank you. Thank you very much.